Hello everyone! Here's what else I saw in September that I haven't already told you about. Movie number 1 is a viewer recommendation, 1952's The Thief. Ray Milland plays a nuclear physicist who risks his career and reputation to leak top-secret information to a spy ring. His reasons are vague and mysterious, and if you've never heard Milland speak before and are curious what he sounds like, this isn't the film for you because there's not a single line of dialogue in the whole thing. It's an impressive feat, a unique application of economy in storytelling, and I was impressed with how well it worked. It seeks alternative ways to convey information, and perhaps the silence amplifies the tension, which runs high as the treasonous scientist grapples with doubt, anxiety, confusion, fear, and conscience. Milland's performance carries the film, every emotion plainly but subtly conveyed on his face, and in his actions as well. There's lots of business in this. I lost count of how many times he took off his coat or lit a cigarette. These trivial things fill time, but they also add to a sense of realism and reinforce his restless state of mind. Also, without words, the music plays a more prominent role, and in general, it's almost like watching a silent movie. It's an interesting experiment, and I think it succeeded. Movie number 2 is a French film, 1967's Les Aventuriers, released overseas as The Last Adventure. A pair of unlucky inventors working on a new super-fast engine need money to fund further experiments, so they and their artistic lady friend go in search of treasure rumored to lie off the African coast. This is one of those movies I learned about from watching fan videos of Alain Delon, now the late Alain Delon. Certain images and clips from this one just kept jumping out at me, and I wanted to see it, but it didn't seem to be available in a format that I could watch. But last month I discovered a way I could see it thanks to moviedetective.net, which seems to be a legitimate business. Legitimate and legal. The quality is great, and the English subtitles are pretty good enough that I could follow the script, though there are a few typos and awkward translations. My mom and I watched it together, and we more or less liked it. Delon's Daredevil pilot was too irresponsible for her liking, but she couldn't deny that he looks really good here. This is a prime example of how he could wear any outfit, any hairstyle, any amount of facial hair, and still be one of the most handsome actors ever. Ugh, anytime I have to collect pictures from one of his movies, it's such a chore. Foolhardiness aside, the pilot and his older business partner, co-star Lino Ventura, and the girl who goes along with them, Joanna Shimkus, form a winsome trio. And the first part of this film is quite jaunty. Sometimes it's a little goofy and strange, but it's generally a carefree escapade. And then there's a complete tonal shift, which I was not prepared for. It was shocking, and after that, I had no idea what to expect. Things take a dire turn, and we end up in a far more bittersweet place than earlier content had suggested. It was a bit hard to digest it all. Still, it was an entertaining film, and there's plenty of eye candy. If Alain Delon doesn't do it for you, there's some picturesque location shooting, and the old island fortress setting is fascinating. Movie number 3 is 1952's Assignment Paris. In this Cold War thriller, George Sanders runs the French office of an American newspaper. Amid political turmoil in Budapest, an American citizen is arrested and sentenced to 20 years, and Sanders agrees to send in his hotshot reporter, Dana Andrews, to get a closer look. Beforehand, I wasn't sure if I'd already seen this or not. Assignment Paris could be anything, it's not a very distinct title. But it didn't look familiar, plus striking Swedish starlet Marta Torén plays the lady reporter that Sanders and Andrews both want, and I know I've only seen her in 2 other movies. This was good. While I like Dana Andrews, I do think he was a little miscast. There are so many comments made about his character being a young upstart and whippersnapper, things like, George Sanders was doing X while you were still learning to Y, but Sanders and Andrews are clearly around the same age. Sanders was only 3 years older, and it just makes those jabs sound silly. If they had cast someone younger, that wouldn't have been an issue. Like the last one, this movie also has a stark tonal shift. The first part is somewhat light, a typical newspaper establishing the relationships among the staff, the comic chagrin of two guys in pursuit of the same lady, and then the second half takes a darker turn, and the situation turns desperate. I don't care for that unevenness in the script, but there is good suspense and drama here. Movie number 4 is 2022's Jurassic World Dominion. Hold on, folks, because we're going to be talking about this one for several minutes. This is the third Jurassic World film, the sixth Jurassic Park franchise film, co-written and directed by Colin Trevorrow, I've heard it both ways. I never really wanted to see this one after the last one, Fallen Kingdom, was so bad, but I capitulated to see Sam Neill, Laura Dern, and Jeff Goldblum reunited. They got me with the nostalgia bait. Dinosaurs brought back from extinction now run amok all over the world somehow, forcing nations to figure out what to do with them. The clone girl from the last movie is in hiding with Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard until she gets kidnapped, and genetically modified locusts are destroying the world's food supply. It's up to the leads from both ends of the franchise to team up and resolve these crises. I had heard that the extended edition was the better version, that it was more logical or had more interesting content, so I watched that instead of the theatrical release. It's certainly long. I don't know, I can't say if it's better because I didn't watch the other one. Maybe I would have had even more mixed feelings if I had watched the shorter cut. I do feel Dominion is superior to Fallen Kingdom. The special effects, a mix of CGI and animatronic puppetry like in the olden days, saw a big improvement, and they made a few nice choices. I'm glad Pratt and Howard's leads are still a happy couple. I liked the characters that were added to the protagonist pack. I'm relieved the veteran heroes got more than a cameo and were treated with respect. My main problem is that there's just too much going on. Too many places, too many dinosaurs, too many subplots. It gets messy, and then I stop caring, and about an hour in, during that awful, prolonged Malta section, I suddenly realized it felt way too much like a Mission Impossible movie. I half expected Tom Cruise to come running out of an alley chased by velociraptors vaulting a stegosaurus. That might have been fun, but I don't come to Jurassic Park looking for that. I was happy to see Neil Dern and Goldblum together again. They all look great. It is strange that 30 years later the characters are wearing very similar clothes. It's like the movie thought we wouldn't recognize them without their uniforms. And since when was Alan Grant's hat something that he was so attached to that he'd risk his life to grab it? That feels more like an Indiana Jones kind of gag. They looked right, but it did take a while for them to actually feel like the same people. It was the second half where they seemed to settle in and dialogue flowed more naturally. Or maybe it was just that there wasn't as much conversation in the second half, more action. Or maybe it was me who adjusted. There is fan service, in a way, not as much as I expected, less John Williams, less repetition of famous lines, but there are a ton of little things thrown in for the diehards to recognize, speculate about, and smirk over. Immediately after watching the movie, I had so many thoughts and feelings that I typed up 3 pages of notes, including spoiler stuff. Now, I don't talk about spoilers in my mini-reviews as a rule, but because of the sheer volume and because of the spoilers that I felt needed to be addressed, I did consider doing a solo video for this. But then after some thought and poking around and taking the internet's temperature where this movie is concerned, I realized, I don't want to do a separate video on this. I've got a variety of reasons why I don't want to do that. So here's what we're going to do instead. I'm going to do a spoiler section. You can skip ahead if you don't want to hear this. I don't mind that they had Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler end up together. Like many fans, I kind of assumed that they were a thing at the end of Jurassic Park, so it was disappointing when Jurassic Park 3 burst that bubble. I'm willing for this movie to remedy that. I just thought some of the scenes setting it up were too on the nose and fanfiction-y. I don't care to see them portrayed like they're in a rom-com, and past history is proof that it's not necessary to make their pairing seem plausible. The cloned girl, who it turns out isn't actually a clone. In theory, I agreed that bringing dinosaurs back would expand to experiments with cloned and bioengineered humans. So conceptually, I think she was a good addition. It's just that in this movie, she's an angsty teenager and a tad annoying. I did like how she interacted with the legacy characters. However, the reveal of her origin from the now boring, depressed, and ubiquitous Dr. Wu is lame, and the more I think about it, the more disappointing it gets. When I first heard it, I let out a big guffaw, and then I kept on pondering it, and I was like, ugh, this is just stupid. By the way, it is nice to see B.D. Wong back as Dr. Wu once again, but the character is hardly as compelling as the film seems to want me to think, and not really deserving of the redemptive arc he suddenly receives. You know, when I was listing the different plot lines at the beginning of this review, I actually left out half the threads. Yeah, there's dinosaurs roaming the planet causing issues, there's the clone girl, and there's the locusts. But there's also the ethics of government intervention, there are the evil dinosaur poachers, there's the dinosaur black market, there's the giant corporation that we all know is evil from the start, and there are the not scary velociraptors getting dino-napped. There might be something else that I have forgotten, but it's bloated with subplots. The return of Louis Dodgson. I'd forgotten everything I'd heard in reviews 2 years ago, so when they said his name here, I was like, Louis Dodgson? As in, Dodgson, we got Dodgson here! See, nobody cares. That character gets so little screen time in Jurassic Park that I wasn't sure if this was the same actor or not. It's not. I did always wonder what happened to him in the movie version of events, so okay, here's an answer. But as the main antagonist, he's a tough sell. He's awkward, childish, not intimidating. He's more like a spoiled, pretentious CEO, which, it turns out, was actor Campbell Scott's intention. And in a way, that works. He also had a truthful line: "We don't apologize for our mistakes, we erase them," which is exactly what rich, powerful villains in real life do. I also appreciate the cheeky stroke of poetic justice, killing him off with the same dinosaur that got Dennis Nedry. I just don't think he was a good bad guy. The character was too ridiculous to ever take seriously, and ultimately I can't decide if his return was clever or lazy. As I hinted, I did find the entire Malta sequence a particularly loathsome waste of time. It's boring, it's cliché, it's got the hammiest performance from a character who only exists in that section. I know there are a couple important things in there for the plot, so I say they should have worked them in some other way. Skip the detour. Jurassic World Dominion wasn't brilliant or creative or smart or scary or bold. It wasn't really funny either, and at a certain point I was like, ugh, this is awful. I found it did pick up though, and while I never came close to loving it, I won't pretend that I didn't find moments of it tolerable. And I think it would be an okay note for the franchise to end on. But as I sat listening to Michael Giacchino's surprisingly underwhelming score play over the end credits, I remembered that just a few weeks ago I saw a thumbnail teasing a 4th Jurassic World movie. This one was touted as the epic conclusion of the Jurassic era. It says so on the poster. But hey, why end something when it's still able to make us money? Movie number 5 is 2001's To End All Wars, the true story of a group of Allied soldiers taken prisoner by the Japanese and forced to work on the Death Railway. It's adapted from the same autobiography that 1957's The Bridge on the River Kwai was based on, but from what I've heard, this film follows the book more closely. Though he doesn't get top billing, Kieran McMiniman plays the lead character, Captain Ernest Gordon, whose philosophy of life is challenged and reshaped by the deprivation, disease, humiliation, and cruelty he and the other men suffer. This film is not for the faint of heart. There are graphic injuries and excruciating scenes of torture and execution. It's difficult to watch, but I think it's important to know and understand the history, what these men went through, especially because it's a very good story, and I've read enough first-hand accounts to know this probably isn't over-dramatized. Among the prisoners, the motivation to survive varies. Self-preservation versus hunger for revenge versus pursuit of Christian principles. These mindsets, which sometimes clash, are embodied by Robert Carlyle, Kiefer Sutherland, and Mark Strong, who are all exceptionally cast. I knew this was going to be rough, and it was actually a bit grimmer than I'd anticipated, but I thought it was a great movie, well told, well acted, and I was grateful for what it had to say. I can add this title to my growing list of arduous but inspiring true POW stories. Movie number 6 is 1955's The Ship That Died of Shame, also known as PT Raiders. Richard Attenborough and George Baker star as former shipmates in the Royal Navy who reunite and go into business together, smuggling goods across the English Channel. It's a happy venture and a profitable one until the cargo begins to get too hot. I thought maybe I'd seen this before because the DVD cover looked awfully familiar, but I think the film itself was new to me. It wasn't at all what I had expected, which was something along the lines of The Cruel Sea, In Which We Serve, Each Dawn I Die. It's more of a post-war thriller, although the exciting prologue is set during the war. The performances are very good, especially Attenborough's. Certain visual effects are impressive, and it's got some appealing camera work and photography. It was directed by Basil Dearden and co-stars Bill Owen and Roland Culver, with Bernard Lee and Virginia McKenna playing small but important roles. It's a twisty thriller, and I enjoyed it. Movie number 7 is a recommendation, sort of. I already had it on my radar. 2018's Overlord, which puts a sci-fi horror spin on World War II history. A group of paratroopers drop into France hours before the Allied invasion with the purpose of taking out a clock tower, but they discover the Germans in town have been doing freaky experiments on the villagers, looking for a way to turn the dead into super soldiers. All I knew about this is that it had Nazi zombies, or zombie Nazis, whichever you prefer, and I was hoping that it would be set during the war instead of after, preferably on D-Day, as the title implies. I've already seen Nazi zombies after the war in 1967's The Frozen Dead. I was looking for something different, so I was pleased. Pleased doesn't seem like the right word, but I was pleased to find it was insane zombie action and terror taking place against the backdrop of Operation Overlord. It's a loud, intense, creepy movie. The tone is dark. It's not played for laughs. At least I didn't think it was played for laughs. And it's definitely not for kids. There's violence, nasty visuals, lots of F-bombs, attempted rape. So, yeah, viewer discretion is advised. As a war movie, it was fairly decent. There were some aesthetic choices that were pretty cool and unique, though certain elements are familiar if you've watched other D-Day reenactments. And as a horror movie, it was quite effective. It had us on edge from the start, and once that angle of the other was added, it entered another dimension of disturbing. There are a few really gross scenes here. There were some visuals that made me feel a bit queasy. My gore threshold is higher than it used to be. Even in the last few years, I feel like I've become a little more tolerant. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I still don't care for body horror. And there were a couple grotesque things that might have gone over the line for me. My mom and dad were also like, "Oh, yikes," which was funny, except afterward my mom said that she wished she could get some of those visuals out of her head, and then I felt bad. I was in the same boat. There's one part in particular that I was like, I would like to unsee that. But, it's one thing if it's me. I'm not trying to traumatize my poor mother. You might say the premise is absurd, but I'd argue it's not as far-fetched as it may sound. We know the Nazis were into some sick stuff and conducted some horrible experiments, and they would try anything to rule the world, so it doesn't require a huge leap of the imagination to accept the idea that some crazy doctor tucked away in a little French town could have been doing this. And I think that makes it even scarier. Did I like it? I don't know. I don't think I'll ever want to see it again, but I thought it surprisingly well done. It was riveting, stimulating, bombastic, it had good pacing, good atmosphere, it icked me out. I'd say it did what it intended to do reasonably well. Movie number 8 is a viewer recommendation, 1966's The Night of the Grizzly. Clint Walker plays a former lawman who brings his family to a rundown ranch out west, where they find themselves dealing with local ruffians, the greediest man in town, and a vicious grizzly bear. Because of the bear, I formed the impression that this would be one of those man versus beast horror movies, but it's not really. It's much more wholesome. It's a family western. It wasn't made by Disney, but it feels like it could have been. Parts of it are downright corny, and the story's fairly predictable. Clint Walker has some trouble keeping his shirt on, but I appreciate that his character is a loving husband and family man, and as the lead, he's adequate. What I enjoyed more were some of the supporting characters. Victoria Paige Meyerink as the youngest daughter, a funny little girl who befriends the town slouch, played by Jack Elam in the nicest role anybody ever gave him. Nancy Culp as the eccentric owner of the town store, who looks and sounds like a Carol Burnett character. Keenan Wynn as the richest man in town who has to put up with his doltish sons, and Ellen Corby as a sassy rancher. To me, the supporting cast ended up dominating the film. The bear? Kind of forgettable. Movie number 9 is a viewer recommendation, 1961's Battle of the Worlds. An asteroid is detected on a collision course with Earth, but at the last moment it goes into a tight orbit instead, throwing off the planet's rhythm and spelling imminent destruction. Sounds a bit like Armageddon/Deep Impact meets Moonfall. This was an Italian production that stars Claude Rains as the crotchety, egotistical head scientist who becomes obsessed with unmasking just what or who is controlling the asteroid. The filmmakers apparently knew what a treasure they had in Claude Rains, as his character gets all the good lines, and his team treats him with timorous but affectionate deference. Rains is wonderful here, as I would expect him to be, saving the entire picture, and thank goodness he's in the whole thing, not just a couple scenes. The rest of the cast is forgettable, some of the character development and relationship drama doesn't gel, and the first part of the film is overly technical and plodding. But once Rains enters, it picks up, and the final act is decent, with atmospheric sets and trippy photography. I can't say it's a great movie, it took too long to get somewhere and distinguish itself, but if like me you're a fan of Claude Rains and you like old sci-fi, you might check it out. Movie number 10 is 2022's Living. Bill Nighy stars as a senior civil servant in the Public Works Department whose terminal diagnosis leads him to reevaluate his existence. This is a remake of the 1952 Akira Kurosawa film Ikiru starring Takashi Shimura, which I finally watched and reviewed just a few months ago. Those of you who balk at remakes of classic films, I'm right there with ya. There are some things so iconic that they should never be remade. However, I'm not against it wholesale, especially if you think of it not as a remake or an imitation, but as a different adaptation. If I may go a step further and risk really offending someone, This film had a stronger emotional impact on me. There are several things that stood out. I favored Amy Lou Wood's interpretation of the young woman who works in the office. I preferred this version of the discussion among the staff at the end. I liked the soundtrack, especially the use of Ralph Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a theme by Thomas Tallis. I thought making it an English period film worked well, and it was interesting how they sought to replicate classic film style. Most importantly, Bill Nighy gives perhaps his best performance. He was perfect. There's a scene where he's remembering moments from the past, responding to those memories as he's reliving them, and his face becomes so expressive and heartbreaking. He really astounded me in this. I will say I didn't expect it to be as much of a remake as it was, down to the inclusion of certain lines and details, but while I wish they had made a few more changes, it never felt like a cheap or lazy recreation. I had been on the fence about this, kind of interested, but also wary, and after I expressed that, a couple of you encouraged me to go ahead and check it out, and I'm so glad you did. Movie number 11 is 2018's The Command. That's the title it had on Prime. I found out afterward it was also released as Kursk, or Kursk: The Last Mission. Explosions on a Russian submarine leave a group of men trapped at the bottom of the sea. While they struggle to hold on, waiting for rescue, their families grow frustrated over the government's apparent inertia. This is another solid film based on a true story. I didn't know that it was a true story when I was watching it. My dad did. Thankfully, he didn't spoil the outcome, so the film was able to have its maximum effect. I knew nothing about the plot going in, so it took me a while to get my bearings. And I was also confused because the film opens in a different aspect ratio, and I spent the first 15 minutes wondering if our TV had gotten messed up, and I was on the verge of checking the settings when it expanded into widescreen. I guess it was just being artistic. The cast is great. Matthias Schoenaerts stars as the highest-ranking survivor, trying to keep everyone sane and alive without losing hope himself. Léa Seydoux plays his anxious wife, and Colin Firth and Max von Sydow have significant supporting roles. Another standout is Magnus Malang, whose sensitive sailor does all he can to rally the others' spirits as precious hours drag by. This was a very good film overall, with some moments that were extremely tense and others that were emotional. While it is about the sailor's ordeal, it's also about the increasing agony of those on land trying to get information from a tight-lipped government that seems to place a higher value on state secrets than individual lives. It's another very good, albeit heavy, film. And that's what else I saw in September. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you heard about some movies to pique your interest. As usual, you can find a list of the films and where/how I watched them in the description. As far as my plans for October go, I haven't fully committed yet, but I'm thinking I might do what I did last year, tackle my mountain of spooky movie titles, and check in each week with a collection of mini-reviews. Basically, a What Else I Saw video like this, but on a weekly basis. So stay tuned for that, and thanks for watching!